April rain drummed on the roof of the bus as I rode home after a 10-hour shift at the hardware store. Everything for the home. My legs ached from standing all day, and my head throbbed from endless questions from customers about where to find nails or how best to patch a crack in the bathroom. At 20, I was already used to the monotony of the job, but today, the fatigue seemed particularly heavy. The bus stopped 2 blocks from our house in the western part of Crescent City. I got out, opened my battered umbrella, and wandered down familiar streets, trying to avoid the puddles. Our neighborhood wasn't exactly affluent, just ordinary one-story houses with small yards, where neighbors knew almost everything about each other but preferred to keep their distance. The house at 37 Marine Street was much like the others: gray siding, a small porch, an old larch tree by the fence. I slowed down when I saw Duncan's car in the driveway. My brother rarely came home on weekdays. He usually worked late at my father's construction company, Finch and Sons. The name always made me smile bitterly. Not Finch and Children, but specifically Sons, even though there was only one son. I didn't exist in that equation. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and went inside. Voices and the clatter of dishes came from the kitchen, unusual for our house, where everyone usually ate alone whenever they felt like it. "Merritt, is that you?" my father called out, and I flinched. There was no warmth in his voice, only impatience. "Yes," I replied, taking off my wet jacket and hanging it on a hook in the hallway. "Come here, we're having family dinner." Family dinner. Those words sounded absurd in our house. The last time we had dinner together was probably 3 years ago, when my father wanted to announce the expansion of his company. Back then, he only spoke to Duncan, as if I wasn't even at the table. I walked into the kitchen, where my father and brother were already sitting at the set table. The smell of roasted meat and potatoes filled the room. There was a pot of stewed vegetables on the stove, clearly not my father's cooking. He must have ordered food from that new delivery restaurant. "Sit down." My father nodded to the empty chair. "We were waiting for you." Duncan looked at me with barely concealed irritation. At 28, he was the spitting image of his father. The same heavy features, square jaw, and deep-set brown eyes. His blonde hair was cut short, and his hands were calloused from working on construction sites. When I was a child, he often told me that I didn't look like a real Finch. Too thin, with light hair and gray eyes. "You're all your mother," he would say, and it never sounded like a compliment. I sat down at the table, feeling the tension in the air. "What's going on?" I asked when the silence dragged on, and my father and brother exchanged glances. Garland Finch cleared his throat and helped himself to a large portion of meat. "I have some news," he said in an official tone. "I've made a decision about the future of the company." My heart sank. I knew I had no stake in the family business, but something in my father's voice made me wary. "I am handing over complete control of Finch and Sons to Duncan," my father continued, nodding toward my brother. "As of tomorrow, he will be the sole owner of the controlling stake. I will remain as a consultant, but he will make all the decisions." Duncan didn't hide his smug smile. He had always known that the company would go to him. It was an unspoken rule in our family. Ever since he started working with my father at the age of 15, he had been groomed to take the helm one day. "Congratulations," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "It's not just about the company," my father continued, without looking at me. "I'm also transferring the house to Duncan. It will be part of the overall agreement." Now I was really surprised. The house we lived in had been in our family for 2 generations. My grandparents had built it with their own hands. And what about me? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I immediately regretted it. My father's face darkened. He put down his fork and looked at me for the first time that evening. His eyes showed the same expression I had seen all my life, a mixture of disappointment and poorly concealed hostility. "What should happen to you?" he asked coldly. "You work in your shop. You live as you please." "I mean, where will I live? And is there anything for me?" My voice faltered, and I hated myself for the weakness. My father's face contorted. He slammed his palm on the table so hard that the plates jumped. "You'll get nothing!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the kitchen. "You're a useless child who took the most precious thing I ever had." "Do you think you have any right to anything in this house? After what you did?" I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. Of course, I knew he blamed me for my mother's death. It wasn't a secret in our family, but usually it was expressed in cold silence, neglect, and aloofness. He rarely spoke about it directly, especially with such vehemence. "I didn't ask to be born," I said quietly, staring at my plate. "But you were born," Duncan interrupted, smiling slightly. "And Mom died. That's the price of your existence, little sister." I looked up and met his gaze. As a child, Duncan had simply avoided me, but over the years his attitude had grown into open hostility. He was 8 years older than me and remembered our mother. He remembered what their life had been like before I came along. In his mind, I had destroyed their perfect family. "Duncan deserves everything he gets," my father continued, calmer now, but still with anger in his voice. "He's been working for the company since he was a teenager. He puts his whole self into it. What have you done?" The question hung in the air. What had I done? I grew up in a house where I was barely tolerated, where dozens of photos hung on the walls, my father and mother on their wedding day, little Duncan in my mother's arms, family picnics and holidays, but not a single one with me. It was as if, after my mother's death, life in the house had stopped, and my existence was an annoying necessity that everyone preferred to ignore. I tried. God, how I tried to earn even a drop of approval. I got straight A's in school, hoping that good grades would make my father proud of me, but he just silently looked at my report cards and put them aside. I helped around the house, cooked, cleaned, did the laundry, but it was taken for granted. Once I even tried to ask for a job at a company, but my father cut me off. "That's no place for girls." "I've always tried to be helpful," I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Your efforts," my father emphasized the last word as if it were something shameful, "won't bring Evelyn back to me. They won't bring Duncan's mother back." I lowered my gaze, feeling the familiar weight of guilt. The rational part of me understood that I wasn't to blame for the complications during childbirth that took my mother's life. But when you hear your whole life that your birth was the cause of a tragedy, you start to believe it. "Wesley Taft is coming at 2:00 tomorrow," my father said, returning to his dinner. "He'll prepare all the documents for the transfer of the company and the house." Wesley Taft had been the Finch's family lawyer for as long as I could remember, an elderly man with a neat gray beard and kind eyes. He always greeted me when he came to see my father, and sometimes brought me candy when I was little. Those were rare moments of human warmth in our home. "All right," Duncan replied, clearly pleased with the turn of events. "I'll clear my schedule." Dinner continued in an awkward silence. I barely touched my food. My appetite had completely disappeared. My mind was racing with thoughts about what would happen next. If the house went to Duncan, I wouldn't even have a roof over my head. With my saleswoman's salary, I could barely afford a room, let alone a full apartment in Crescent City, where housing prices were rising every year. I got up from the table when it became clear that the conversation was over. "Thanks for dinner," I said out of habit, even though there wasn't much to be thankful for. My father nodded without looking up from his plate. Duncan smirked. "Don't worry, little sister," he said with false concern in his voice. "Maybe I'll let you stay, as a maid." I didn't deign to answer him and left the kitchen. Climbing the creaky stairs, I entered my small bedroom at the end of the hallway, the furthest room in the house, as if someone was trying to keep me physically distant from my family. The room was simple: a narrow bed, an old chest of drawers, and a desk by the window. On the walls were a few nature posters that I had hung up to liven up the space a little. Unlike Duncan's room, where even after he moved into his own apartment, my father had kept all his teenage trophies and awards, my room had nothing to do with my family's history. I walked over to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Under a stack of t-shirts lay the only photo of my mother that I had managed to steal from an old photo album. In it, Evelyn Finch was sitting in the garden, her face turned toward the sun. She was beautiful, with soft, light hair, delicate features, and gray eyes that Duncan said I had inherited. She was about 30 in the photo, and she looked happy and carefree. I never knew her. I never heard her voice or felt her embrace. To me, she was a ghost, a shadow that was invisibly present in every corner of our house. As a child, I often imagined that she was watching me from heaven and, unlike my father and brother, loved me. Touching the photo brought back the familiar feeling of bitterness. I wonder if she could have loved me if she had survived. Or would she have blamed me for what happened? I only knew the story of her death from snippets of conversation and phrases I overheard. My father never told me directly. It seems she started bleeding right after I was born. The doctors couldn't stop it. She died holding me in her arms. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who remembered those days, once let slip. Putting the photo back, I sat down on the bed and wrapped my arms around my knees. What should I do now? Where should I go? I had no friends to turn to. Years of isolation in my family had taught me to keep to myself and stay away from other people. My co-workers at the store were just acquaintances, nothing more. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to cry. Quiet tears rolled down my cheeks as I stared out the window at the drizzling rain. At moments like this, I felt my loneliness particularly keenly, as if I were invisible, a ghost in my own life, an unwanted reminder of tragedy. Downstairs, the front door slammed. Duncan must have left. A few minutes later, I heard my father's heavy footsteps on the stairs and the click of his bedroom door. The day ended like so many before it. We went our separate ways, carrying with us unspoken resentment and pain. I lay down, fully clothed, on top of the blanket and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow the lawyer would come and my fate would be sealed. I knew I couldn't change anything. I had no money, no power, not even the moral right, in my father's opinion, to claim anything in this family. "You'll get nothing." His words echoed in my head like a sinister sentence. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really didn't deserve anything after what had happened because of me. With this thought, I fell into a restless sleep, where I dreamed of a woman with light hair who called my name, but every time I tried to get closer, she disappeared into the darkness. Morning came too quickly. I woke up to the sun's rays shining through the loosely drawn curtains and lay motionless for a few minutes, gathering my thoughts. The events of the previous evening hit me with a heavy realization. Today, my fate would be decided, and not in my favor. The clock on the bedside table showed 10 o'clock. I was usually at work at this time, but today was my day off. It was a sad irony that my day off had fallen on the very day when I would be deprived of the last thing that connected me to this family. I slowly got up and went to the window. Yesterday's rain had stopped, leaving puddles and freshness in the air. Next door, Mrs. Patterson was hanging laundry. She was over 70, but she still preferred to dry her clothes outside rather than in the machine. Forcing myself to move, I went to the bathroom. The mirror reflected my pale face with red eyes from crying and tangled blonde hair. I looked exhausted, and no amount of makeup could hide it. However, today it didn't matter how I looked. After washing my face with cold water, I combed my hair and tied it back in a simple ponytail. I put on jeans and a loose shirt. Nothing special, but at least it was clean and neat. It wasn't that my father or brother cared about my appearance, but Mr. Taft had always been kind to me, and I didn't want to look completely pathetic in his eyes. As I descended the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. My father and Duncan were already having breakfast, discussing something about work. When I entered, the conversation stopped immediately. "Good morning," I said, heading for the coffee maker. My father nodded without looking at me. Duncan ignored my greeting completely. "Taft will be here at 2, my father said, turning to Duncan. "You need to be here by then." "I will be," my brother replied, finishing his coffee. "I need to stop by the site on River Road to check on the foundation pouring, and then I'll be back." I poured myself some coffee and sat down at the table, trying to take up as little space as possible. This was how most of our family breakfasts went. I was invisible, an extra on the sidelines of their lives. "Are the documents ready?" Duncan asked my father. "Yes, Taft has everything prepared." "Today is just a formality, signatures and notarization," my father said in a businesslike tone, as if he were talking about a routine transaction rather than a decision that would change my life. I gathered all my strength to ask the question, "Do I need to be present at the signing?" My father finally looked at me, and I could see the irritation in his eyes. Why? It's none of your business. But if it's about the house— Listen, he interrupted. I already told you yesterday. The house is going to Duncan. The company is going to Duncan. Period. You don't need to be there. Duncan grinned at me with undisguised triumph. Don't worry, little sister. I won't kick you out right away. You can stay here a little longer until you find something suitable. His generosity was worse than a direct refusal. He enjoyed his power over me, reveling in my helplessness. I finished my coffee in silence, avoiding further conversation. When Duncan left and my father disappeared into his study, I was left alone in the kitchen. Thoughts swirled in my head like autumn leaves in the wind. What should I do next? Where would I live? Would I be able to find another job that would allow me to rent at least a room? I spent the whole day in a strange stupor. I cleaned my room, sorted through my things, mentally separating what I would take with me from what I would have to leave behind. I didn't have much. Clothes, a few books, an old laptop, and a box of childhood memories, dried flowers, postcards from school friends who had long since disappeared from my life, my first paycheck. It would all fit easily into one suitcase. At 1:30, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw Wesley Taft's dark blue sedan. The lawyer was punctual, as always. I watched him get out of the car, a short man in his 70s, wearing a strict gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. His neat gray beard and kind eyes always inspired confidence in me. My father came out to meet him on the porch. They shook hands and disappeared into the house. A few minutes later, Duncan pulled up in his black pickup truck with the company logo on the door. I sat in my room, listening to the voices downstairs. Part of me wanted to go down and witness my fate being decided, but another part couldn't bear the thought of my father and brother's triumphant looks. In the end, curiosity won out. I quietly descended the stairs, trying not to step on the creaky steps, and stopped in the hallway, where I could see my father's office. The door was ajar, and I could see part of the room and hear the conversation. Wesley Taft was sitting at his desk with papers spread out in front of him. My father and Duncan stood nearby, leaning over the documents. This is a standard deed of transfer for real estate. The lawyer's voice was calm and professional. And this is for the transfer of company shares. Everything has been drawn up according to your instructions, Garland. My father nodded, glancing over the documents. Excellent. Let's get this done. Are you sure you want to transfer all your assets to a single heir? Taft asked, a hint of doubt in his voice. Absolutely, my father replied firmly. Duncan is the only one who will carry on our family's legacy. He's earned it. Duncan straightened up and put his hand on his father's shoulder, a gesture that expressed both gratitude and a certain superiority. I won't let you down, Dad. The company will remain in good hands. Taft nodded, but without much enthusiasm. He took several more documents out of his briefcase and laid them out on the table. This needs your signature, Garland. And yours, Duncan. He pointed to the signature lines. And Merritt's signature as well. I flinched when I heard my name. My father and brother exchanged surprised glances. Why do we need her signature? My father asked sharply. She has nothing to do with this. Taft adjusted his glasses and looked at my father with slight confusion. According to the law, the consent of all legal heirs is required for the disposal of inherited property. Merritt is your daughter and is entitled to a share of the inheritance unless she voluntarily renounces it. But she's not an heir, my father exclaimed, his face reddening with anger. She's a nobody here. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Even after all these years of coldness, those words hurt like a sharp knife. Wesley Taft sat up straight in his chair, his gaze suddenly hard. In fact, you should know that Merritt has legal rights, he said calmly, but with unexpected determination. And not just as your daughter. My father frowned, not understanding where the lawyer was going with this. What are you talking about, Wesley? What other rights? Taft opened his briefcase and took out a yellowed folder with documents. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Garland, he said, and there was sadness in his voice. I hoped it would never come, that you would find room in your heart for both of your children. What nonsense are you talking about? My father was beginning to lose his patience. Taft opened the folder and took out a document protected by a transparent sleeve. "This is the agreement you signed with Evelyn 20 years ago, shortly before Merritt was born." I froze, afraid to move. "Mom? An agreement? I've never heard of this." My father took the document and stared at it with undisguised surprise. "What is this paper? I don't remember any agreement." Not surprising, Taft nodded. It was a difficult time. Evelyn was in her last month of pregnancy and had complications. The doctors warned of possible problems. "I remember that," my father said hollowly. "But what does an agreement have to do with it?" "Evelyn was a smart woman," Taft continued, "and very far-sighted. She had a premonition that she might not survive the birth, and she was afraid that if she had a girl, you wouldn't accept her the way you accepted Duncan." The father turned pale. Duncan looked from his father to the lawyer, clearly not understanding what was going on. "This is nonsense," the father finally said. "I never signed anything like that." "You did, Garland," Taft said firmly. "I witnessed it myself. Evelyn insisted on this agreement, and you agreed because you loved her and wanted to reassure her. You were certain that a boy would be born, and that this document would never matter." I stepped forward, unable to remain in the shadows any longer. 3 pairs of eyes immediately turned to me. "What agreement?" I asked, my voice sounding unexpectedly firm. Wesley Taft looked at me with warmth and a touch of sadness. "Your mother, Evelyn, prepared a legal document that your father signed a month before you were born. According to this agreement, if anything happens to her, her child, that is, you, Merritt, will have a say in all key decisions concerning the family and the family business upon reaching the age of majority." I stared at the lawyer in shock, unable to believe my ears. "A say?" I asked. "What's more," Taft continued, "according to this document, no important family asset can be disposed of or transferred without your written consent. This applies to both the house and the company." Duncan let out a sound like a growl. "This is nonsense." He turned to his father. "Dad, tell me this isn't true." But his father remained silent, staring at the document in his hands. His face grew paler as he read line after line. "I remember that day," he finally said quietly. "Evelyn was very upset. The doctors had just told her there was a risk of complications, and she was panicking. She made me sign some papers, saying it was for the baby's safety. I signed without reading them, just to calm her down." "And you forgot about it," Taft finished for him. "Because then tragedy struck, and you lost Evelyn." My father looked up at me, and for the first time in many years, there was no anger or disappointment in his eyes, only confusion and something that looked like fear. "So that means I can't transfer the company to Duncan without Merritt's consent?" he asked the lawyer. "That's correct," Taft nodded. "The agreement is very clear and legally watertight. Merritt has veto power over all key decisions concerning family assets." Duncan walked over to the table and snatched the document from his father's hands. "Let me see this nonsense," he said, quickly scanning the text, his face contorting with rage. "This is some kind of scam. The document is 20 years old. It can't be valid." "It can," Taft replied calmly. "It was duly certified and registered. Its term is unlimited. It is valid until the Finch family assets mentioned in it exist." I stood in the middle of the office, feeling the ground slip away beneath my feet. Mom. My mom, whom I had never known, had taken care of me. She had foreseen what might happen and had done everything she could to protect me. "Why did you keep this a secret all these years?" I asked Taft. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The lawyer sighed. "There was a condition in the agreement. I was not to reveal its existence until you came of age and until a situation arose that required your involvement. Evelyn hoped that such a situation would never arise, that Garland would find it in himself to love you as much as he loved Duncan." He looked at my father with obvious reproach. "I've watched your family all these years, Garland. I saw how you distanced yourself from your daughter, how you blamed her for Evelyn's death. It was unfair, and it would have broken Evelyn's heart." My father sank into his chair, suddenly aged and haggard. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Every time I look at her, I see Evelyn, and I remember the day I lost her. But you didn't lose her completely, Taft said gently. Part of Evelyn lives on in your daughter, in her eyes, in her smile, in her personality. Merritt is so much like her mother that sometimes when I look at her, I see Evelyn when she was young. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. No one had ever said those words to me before. No one had ever told me that I was like my mother, that there was something of her in me besides the guilt for her death. Duncan threw the document on the table. "This is nonsense. We'll contest this agreement in court. Merritt has no connection to the company. She never worked there." "You can try," Taft replied calmly, "but I wouldn't advise it. The agreement is flawless, and any court will be on Merritt's side." He turned to me. "Your mother was a very wise woman, Merritt. She knew what might happen and did everything she could to protect you. She left you not only a voice, but also a letter." My heart skipped a beat. "A letter?" Taft nodded and took a yellowed envelope from his briefcase. "Evelyn asked me to give it to you when you came of age. I was supposed to give it to you on your 18th birthday, but—" He glanced at my father. "I hoped that the situation in your family would change and that it would no longer be necessary. I was wrong to put it off for so long." "I'm sorry." He handed me the envelope. I took it with trembling hands, looking at my name written in elegant handwriting, Merritt. It was my mother's handwriting. It was the first thing I had ever seen written by her. "This can't be," my father muttered, watching me. "All this time—" "Yes, Garland." Taft nodded. "All this time, Evelyn tried to protect her daughter, even from beyond the grave. She knew you better than you think, and she foresaw what might happen." I clutched the envelope tightly, afraid to open it here in front of them. It was too personal, too important. "What now?" Duncan asked, looking from me to the lawyer. "We can't transfer the company without her consent." "You can't," Taft confirmed. "What's more, according to the agreement, Merritt is entitled to 1/3 of the company when she turns 21. She's already past that age." "1/3 of the company?" Duncan couldn't believe his ears. "This is insane." "It is Evelyn's will," Taft said firmly, "and it is legally binding." I stood in the middle of the office, feeling like the whole world was turning upside down. All my life I had felt like a stranger in this house, an unwanted burden, the cause of a family tragedy. And suddenly it turned out that the mother I had never known had taken care of me, protected me, given me a voice. "I want to read the letter," I said, clutching the envelope tighter. "Alone." Taft nodded understandingly. "Of course, Merritt, it's your right." My father looked up at me, and there was something new in his gaze, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and perhaps fear. "You can't block the transfer of the company," he said, but his voice no longer had its former confidence. "This decision is necessary for the future of the family." "I haven't decided anything," I replied calmly. "I need time to think it over." With that, I turned and left the office, still clutching the envelope in my hands, the first and only message I had ever received from my mother. I went up to my room, clutching the envelope tightly in my hands. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. Closing the door behind me, I leaned against it and slowly slid to the floor. I could hear excited voices downstairs. Duncan was shouting something, and my father was responding more calmly, but also in a raised voice. Wesley Taft's calm voice occasionally cut through their argument, like a ray of light in a dark room. But all these sounds reached me muffled, as if through a thick layer of water. All my attention was focused on the yellowed envelope with my name on it. "Merritt," it said in elegant handwriting, slanted slightly to the right. The letters were smooth and rounded, as if dancing on the paper. I ran my finger over them, imagining my mother writing them 20 years ago, not yet knowing that she would never see her daughter. The envelope was sealed, the glue long since dried and hardened. I opened it carefully, trying not to tear the paper. This thing was too precious to be handled carelessly. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age like the envelope. I unfolded it, and a small photograph fell onto my lap. It was of a young woman with a rounded belly, sitting in a garden. She was smiling at the camera, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Her light hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and her gray eyes shone with such tenderness that it took my breath away. My mother, pregnant with me. I turned the photo over. On the back was written, 7 months, waiting to meet you, baby girl. Baby girl. She knew she was having a girl, and she was waiting for me. Tears blurred my vision as I began to read the letter. My dear Merritt, if you are reading this letter, it means that I was not able to be there to see you grow up. I was not able to hold your hand on your first day of school, help you with your homework, or comfort you after your first heartbreak. I was not able to tell you how much I love you before I even saw your face. I am writing this letter in the 8th month of my pregnancy. The doctors say there is a risk of complications, and although I hope for the best, I need to be prepared for the worst. So I asked our family friend and lawyer, Wesley Taft, to give you this letter when you are old enough to understand. Merritt is the name your father and I chose for you. It means worthy, and I believe you will grow up to be worthy of all the best this world has to offer. I would love to see the woman you become. Your father, Garland, is a good man, but he sometimes has trouble expressing his feelings. He really wanted a son to carry on the family business. When Duncan, your older brother, was born, Garland was so happy. But when we found out we were having another child and the doctor said it was a girl, I saw the disappointment in his eyes. I'm afraid that when I'm gone, that disappointment will turn into something more. I'm afraid he might not give you what you deserve, simply because you're not the son he wanted so badly. That's why I insisted on an agreement that guarantees you a say in family matters and a share in the company. It's not because I don't trust your father. It's because I know him better than anyone else. I know his strengths and his weaknesses, and I want to protect you from the latter. I hope that all of this will prove unnecessary, that I will be around to see you grow up, that your father will love you as much as I do, that your family will be happy and complete. But if that doesn't happen, remember, you are not alone. I am always with you, in your heart, in your thoughts, in your actions. You are a part of me, the best part, and you will live on. Be strong, my girl. Be kind, and never let anyone make you feel unworthy of love and respect. With eternal love, your mother, Evelyn. I reread the letter several times until the words began to blur with tears. 20 years ago, my mother foresaw everything that had happened. She knew her husband better than he knew himself, and she did everything she could to protect me. For the first time in my life, I felt a real connection with her. Not a ghostly image from other people's stories, not a vague sense of loss, but a real person who loved me even before I was born, who thought about me, cared about me, even though he knew he might never see me grow up. There was a soft knock at the door. I quickly wiped my tears and hid the letter in my pocket. Yes? The door opened slightly, and Wesley Taft's face appeared in the doorway. May I come in, Merritt? I nodded, and the elderly lawyer cautiously entered the room. He looked around as if assessing the situation, and his gaze lingered for a moment on the bare walls, where there were no photographs, no posters, nothing that made the room feel like home. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. That was an unexpected revelation. For me too, I replied, still sitting on the floor by the door. Why didn't you tell me before? All these years. Taft sighed heavily, and his shoulders slumped. I should have. It's my fault, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But your mother asked me to reveal the existence of the agreement only in case of extreme necessity. She hoped it would never be necessary, that Garland would find love for his daughter in his heart. But you saw how he treated me all these years, I said, my voice free of accusation, only weary. You knew he blamed me for her death. I did. Taft nodded, and there was genuine sadness in his eyes. And I tried many times to talk to him about it. I reminded him of Evelyn's last request, to take care of you as he did Duncan, but Garland, he closed himself off in his grief. He couldn't look at you without remembering his loss. What about my loss? I asked quietly. I lost a mother I never knew, and a father who never wanted to know me. Taft nodded, acknowledging the truth of my words. You're right, and there's no excuse for how you were treated. But now you have a chance to change everything. The agreement gives you a voice, real power in the family. I looked at the photo of my mother, which I was still holding in my hand. What kind of person was she? My mother? Taft's face softened, and his eyes filled with the warmth of memories. Evelyn was an amazing woman. Smart, kind, but also incredibly determined. When she made up her mind, nothing could change it. Garland fell in love with her at first sight, and it's no wonder. She lit up every room she walked into. He smiled at the thought. You know, she was a lot like you. Not just physically, although you're her spitting image, but also in character. The same quiet strength, the same dignity, even in the most difficult situations. I never thought of myself as strong. All my life, I felt more like an invisible person, trying not to attract too much attention, not to provoke my father's anger or my brother's contempt. What am I supposed to do now? I asked, looking at Taft. With this agreement, with the company, it's entirely your decision, Merritt, he replied. The agreement gives you veto power over all key decisions and a third of the company. You can use that as you see fit. He paused, then added, Your mother hoped it would make Garland treat you fairly. That knowing your rights would force him to respect you. Maybe he would even learn to see you as more than a reminder of his loss, but as a part of Evelyn that lives on. Heavy footsteps sounded from below, and a moment later the door swung open. His father stood in the doorway, his face red with anger. What game are you playing, Taft? He growled. 20 years of keeping this secret, and then you reveal it when I decide to hand the company over to my son? Taft stood up, meeting his gaze calmly. This isn't a game, Garland. It was Evelyn's last wish, and I fulfilled her request to keep the agreement secret until a situation arose where Merritt's rights would be threatened. Merritt has no rights to the company. My father raised his voice. She never worked there. She knows nothing about the construction business. And who is to blame for that? I asked, surprising myself as I got up from the floor. I asked to work for the company when I graduated from high school. You said there was no place for girls there. My father turned to me, and for a moment, something like confusion flashed in his eyes. It was as if he was seeing me for the first time. It's a man's business, he said stubbornly. Construction, hard work. What about accounting, customer service, design? I listed. Does that require a man? My father had no answer. A heavy silence hung in the room. In any case, he finally said, we will contest this agreement in court. A 20-year-old document cannot be legally binding. It can, Taft replied calmly. The agreement is flawlessly drafted and has no expiration date. Furthermore, it was duly registered and notarized. Any court will recognize it as valid. Duncan appeared in the doorway, his face contorted with anger. This is a joke, he exclaimed. My little sister, who has been living off our father her entire life, suddenly gets a third of the company that my father and I built over the years. I never lived off him, I replied quietly but firmly. I've been working since I was 16. I pay my own way. And I never asked for anything except a roof over my head in the house where I was born. And where your birth killed our mother, Duncan blurted out. There was a silence so absolute that it seemed as if time itself had stopped. I looked at my brother, feeling not the usual pain from his words, but something new. Anger that had been building up deep inside me for years and had finally burst out. I didn't kill Mom, I said, and my voice sounded unexpectedly strong. I was a child, a helpless baby. No one is to blame for what happened. Not me, not the doctors, not even fate. It was a tragedy, a terrible accident. But you two turned me into a murderer. You made me grow up feeling guilty for something I didn't do. I took the letter and photo out of my pocket. Do you know what my mother wrote to me? That she loved me even before I was born. That she hoped her husband, my father, would love me too. She was afraid that wouldn't happen, and she was right. I turned to my father. You didn't just not love me. You made me believe that I wasn't worthy of love, that my existence was a mistake for which I would have to pay forever. My father looked at the photograph in my hand, and something in his gaze faltered. You look so much like her, he said hoarsely. Sometimes I couldn't look at you because I saw her eyes, her smile. And that's a reason to reject your own daughter? Taft asked bitterly. Evelyn wouldn't have approved of this, Garland. You know that. My father lowered his head, avoiding the lawyer's gaze. What are you going to do with the company? he asked me directly. "Are you really going to use this agreement to prevent me from giving it to Duncan?" I took a deep breath. The question that would decide my fate. "I don't want to interfere," I said after a long pause. "I never wanted to destroy what you built, but I'm also part of this family, whether you like it or not, and I deserve recognition of that fact." I turned to Taft. "What exactly does this agreement give me, besides veto power?" "A third of the company's shares," he replied. "A vote on the board of directors, and a guarantee that you cannot be excluded from family affairs without your consent." I nodded, thinking about what I had heard. Then I looked at my father and brother. "This is my decision. I agree to transfer the controlling stake to Duncan. He has worked for the company his entire life and knows it better than anyone else. But I want my legal third of the shares and a seat on the board of directors. And I want to work for the company, not on a construction site, but in an office where I can be useful." Duncan snorted. "You don't know anything about business." "I'm a quick learner," I replied calmly. "And I have a degree in economics, which I earned while working as a saleswoman and taking evening classes. You didn't know that because you never took an interest in my life." My father looked at me in surprise, as if he were seeing me for the first time. "You took classes? I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. "You never asked me what I did, what my dreams were, what I wanted to be. To you, I was a shadow, a reminder of the past, not a living person with my own hopes and aspirations." Taft coughed to get their attention. "Merritt's offer sounds more than reasonable. Duncan gets control of the company, but Merritt isn't excluded from the family business. It's a compromise that I'm sure Evelyn would have approved of." Father and Duncan exchanged glances. It was clear that they hadn't expected this turn of events. "What about the house?" my father asked. I thought for a moment. The house where I had barely been tolerated for 20 years did not evoke warm feelings in me, but it was the only home I had ever known. "Duncan can keep the house," I decided, "but I want compensation sufficient to buy my own apartment, and I want to take a few things that belong to my mother, photographs, jewelry, anything that reminds me of her." "That's fair," my father reluctantly conceded. Duncan looked less amenable. "What if I don't want to see you in the company?" "Then you won't get a controlling stake," I replied simply, "because I won't consent to the transfer of shares, and will go to court, where everything will be divided equally according to inheritance laws. Is that what you want?" My brother clenched his teeth but said nothing. Even he understood that my compromise was the best option for him. "All right," my father finally said. "We agree to your terms. Taft will prepare new documents reflecting your requirements." The lawyer nodded, and a slight smile appeared on his face. "I'll do it right away, and I must say, I'm glad everything worked out this way." My father and Duncan left the room, leaving Taft and me alone. As soon as the door closed behind them, I sank down onto the bed, feeling suddenly weak. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the confrontation began to wear off. "You did the right thing, Merritt," Taft said, sitting down beside me. "Evelyn would have been proud of you." "Really?" I asked, still not quite believing what had happened. "Absolutely," he nodded. "You could have demanded more. You could have taken revenge for all the years of neglect, but instead, you chose a compromise that gives everyone a chance. That's a sign of true strength and wisdom." I looked at the photo of my mother, which I was still holding in my hand. I just thought, what would she have done in my place? And I realized that she wouldn't want to destroy the family, even if this family was never a real one. Taft smiled gently. "Maybe now you'll have a chance to become a real family. Not right away, of course. Wounds inflicted over 20 years don't heal in a day, but it's a start." I nodded, not entirely sure I believed it was possible. Too much bitterness had built up over the years, too many unforgiven hurts. But something inside me had changed today. It was as if a heavy chain that had bound my heart all my life had finally begun to loosen. "What happens next?" I asked Taft. "I'll prepare the new documents," he replied. "Tomorrow we'll all meet again to sign them, and then a new chapter in your life will begin, Merritt. A chapter in which you will no longer feel like a stranger in your own family." He stood up to leave, but paused at the door. "You know, your mother wasn't just beautiful and intelligent. She was a visionary in her own way. She knew that you would be like her, not only in appearance but also in spirit. And she was right." With those words, he left, leaving me alone with the photograph and the letter, the only things that directly connected me to my mother. I reread the last lines of the letter. "Be strong, my girl. Be kind, and never let anyone make you feel unworthy of love and respect." For the first time in 20 years, I didn't feel guilty for existing. For the first time, I felt that I had a right to a place in this world, a right to my own voice, a right to respect. It wasn't a perfect ending. My father didn't rush to embrace me with tears of remorse. My brother didn't suddenly turn into a loving relative. But something important had changed. The balance of power had shifted, and now I had something I'd never had before, the ability to determine my own destiny. I got up and walked over to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky shades of pink and gold. A new day would bring new challenges and new decisions to be made. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready for them. For the first time, I wasn't alone. My mother took care of me even after she died. She left me not only a legal document granting me material rights, but something much more valuable: the certainty that I was loved, that my existence had meaning and value, and that knowledge was enough to find the strength to move on, not as a victim of circumstances, not as an unwanted child, but as a worthy daughter of her mother.